let's get started here. Um, First of all, just a big thank you to all of you for being here. So almost 50 of us here. This is a great event, great turnout, and I've been looking forward to this for the past couple of weeks since I've gotten a copy of the book to pour over. So I hope you all will pre-order Helen or My Hunger as we're in this chat. And the more you learn about the book, the more you're just going to love it. So they have the physical copies. I have a picture of it, but it's really going to be great for everyone to hold the book and get to pour over it as closely as we've gotten to the past few weeks. So just a quick intro. I know we have a lot of people from all over the place. So we're hosting this with the Writers Center. It's a literary arts nonprofit based in Bethesda, Maryland, and we do workshops, events, all of which are virtual now. Go to writer.org to look at our upcoming event schedule, more craft talks. All of the events are free. And then we have a workshop schedule as well for virtual workshops through the summer. Definitely check that out. And to briefly introduce myself, I'm Emily. I work at the Writers Center as the managing editor of Poet Lore, which is America's oldest poetry magazine. We've been publishing for 131 years now, and our next issue just went to the printer, so it will be on its way to everyone's mailboxes, hopefully in July or August, but order that now as well, or subscribe, and you'll get the next issue to your mailbox. And we're really excited to have Gail Marie Thompson with us tonight. So I'll do just a quick read through of your bio, and then we'll dive right into the good stuff.
Awesome.
So for those who don't know, Gail is the author of Helen or My Hunger, coming soon from Yes Yes Books. Pre-order it, link in the chat multiple times. Also the author of Soldier On from Tupelo Press and two chapbooks, Expeditions to the Polar Seas and If You're a Bear, I'm a Bear. Raised in Georgia and South Carolina, Gail holds a BA from the College of Charleston, an MFA from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a PhD from the University of Georgia, where she received the Robert H. West Award. She is the founding editor of Jellyfish Magazine and lives in the North Georgia mountains, where she directs the creative writing program at Young Harris College. Yay! Okay. Thank you so much for being here and virtually meeting me through the screen.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I'm seeing in the chat, okay, you also host a podcast.
With my really cool friends, Ann and Caroline. It's called Now That We're Friends, and it's through the Oh Miami Foundation.
Amazing. So you have your hands
Go check it out.
So many things.
Yep.
So my first question, I think something that would be great is if you could just describe what the book is about, maybe a quick elevator pitch since
Sure.
Not everyone has it yet or has seen it. And then if you wanted to read a page or two, just to give everyone a little sneak peek at what's inside, that would be great as well.
Cool. Yeah, I'll read not probably, I'm going to do this. I will read 2 pages from Helen. I'm going to read probably 30 minutes or so. No, but yeah, I'll have 2 small things to read from Helen. But overall, so Helen in general is a book-length sequence that started in conversation with the modernist poet H.D.'s Helen in Egypt. And overall, in general, it explores gender and the body through a dialogue with the eidolon or phantom or image of Helen of Troy. And it thinks a lot about representation and language and the harm we can do when we try to use language to describe something, but how necessary it actually is to use language to describe it. So yeah, H.D.'s Helen in Egypt is this epic poem. She wrote it a little bit earlier, but the actual publication date is 1961. And it essentially works to revisit and revise the myth of Helen of Troy, basically from older myths, which are alternative versions of the myth, written by Stesichorus and Euripides. She basically kind of wrote this revisionary tale of the gods basically picking up Helen and taking her to Egypt, and leaving this kind of ghost or eidolon behind in Troy for everyone to kind of fight over. And so then thinking about that ghost or icon or image, Eidolon, I thought of that as kind of a flattened representation of who Helen is now, that there really isn't a Helen anymore, that now it's just kind of this kind of, I think of it as like battered or obliterated image of Helen. And we don't really know who, it doesn't almost even matter who Helen, quote unquote, really was, that she's just kind of part of the story now. And so, yeah, I thought a lot about this replica of Helen, or this image of Helen, and she ends up, so the speaker, I write to Helen a lot, and she kind of ends up being this amalgamation of idealized womanhood, mother, historical icon, and then sometimes kind of a double for the speaker, and therefore thinking a lot about beauty, the body, violence, and so on. And there's a quote that I in thinking about, because it's not just about, it's about Helen of Troy, certainly, but it's so much about how, what the harm that we can do when we tell stories, and specifically like how women's stories get continually told over them so many times, that they're, that who they are doesn't really exist anymore, and they themselves get, you know, battered into this straight image. And so I thought a lot about, I think the quote that I tended to kept coming back to was Adrienne Rich's, how can I break through this film of the abstract without wounding myself or you? Which is just like, to me, how do you try to get at the story? How do you try to get at pain with real words without hurting real people, or without kind of actually hurting the Helen herself? So that's kind of the general speech.
Yeah,
the elevator's
that's great.
a little bit long. Yeah. And yeah, I'll read this one. So this is the first one I wrote of the entire series, and it was based on a poem from Helen in Egypt. That's just a series of questions. And as I was reading the questions, I kind of saw Helen just like get erased and erased and erased. And so the epigraph that this uses is from that poem in Helen in Egypt. And the quote is, "Did they retouch her arms, her shoulders? Did anyone touch her ever? How did she hold a nectarine? Who stood kissing her belly like the ship's bow? What did she see in silk stockings, in the breasted light of the gray pier glass? Were her eyes screened and away? Was her dress blue dashed and signal heavy? Did her hard oaken scars show through? Did she at all find me here, painted with the telephone of her? Was she more afraid of fog or field, living room or bank? How did she move through this caroled multiverse? Had she seen a glacier filled with rivets and the bodies of mermaids? What glowing berries did she hold in her lap, waiting for the snow to start? Was she always told when to be full, when not to be? Did she write the fecundity of mother termites when she wanted to write eating disorder? Was she glad to have me in her future? Did she hear the daughter upstairs watching National Velvet? How often did she speak of willing bodies to be good? Did she alone have a throbbing lightness, a courage in defining some quick green beginning? How then did she recover the hyacinth body, my body like her body? And then just to get a taste of kind of the To Helen poem, I'll read this one. With lemon voices, they called you hated Helen. They called you Eidolon, icon. In the cooked tin sheet, I can see her face, yours, eyes scooped out and over. Sands shift, pull down into a strip. You are no one's mother. I've placed all of this in you, Helen. I am scratching it out, groove-voiced. This is not an embrace, but a crimp, a coil. I breathe out to talk to you, am suddenly not my own. If I'm a creature with a sense of time, of passage, lapse, rupture, or ecstasis, I can be said to remember. I foam trees at the mouth and approach story.
Thank you. Thank you for reading those. I think they give a great representation of some of the things that hopefully we'll talk about. I know I specifically wanted to talk about moments in both of those poems anyway, so This has been great, and it looks like everyone in the chat has been really excited about it too. So if you're chatting, pre-order the book so you can read the whole thing. But I wanted to start just to kind of hear how the book came about for you. I know Greg asked in the chat already about what drew you to HD and Helen, and I guess this is kind of along the same lines of how did you start doing this kind of revision work with the texts and with the story and the mythology that already carries so much permanence in culture? And when did you realize that it was going to become this full-length book?
Well, full disclosure, I was third year PhD and I wanted to have a dissertation. But I don't even think it was that, like, it was very kind of revelatory. I was walking around going, man, it'd be cool to have a dissertation. And then, it just came, like, it wasn't, I mean, I'm sure I was pressured a little bit, but I was taking these classes. I just finished this class on Virginia Woolf and feminism and thinking a lot about Antigone and her voiceless and her scream, or her untranslatable scream, which is my favorite thing about Antigone. And then I was also taking this class on the life, poetry, and prose of Adrienne Rich, and also taking a modern and contemporary British poetry class. Two of those were great. One of those was not. In the British modern and contemporary poetry class, we were reading Yeats. And I don't have a problem with Yeats, but we read No Second Troy, which I'd read before. And essentially in there, it was just, I mean, the twinning of violence and beauty, and all of it's just like a poem about his ex. And he just kept saying, like, you know, he kept thinking of his ex as Helen, and it was just, don't you have a Troy left to burn? Isn't there another Troy left to burn? And like, it was just so unfair that Helen would become this representation of this woman that he felt betrayed by, and that beauty means that violence is going to happen, and that, or just is going to happen because you're beautiful. It's just, sorry, that's the way it goes. We can't help it. And so I decided to read Helen in Egypt, HD's Helen in Egypt, mainly because there weren't any women being taught in the class, and I wanted to focus on HD. And then what started out as an HD presentation turned into kind of an anti-Yeats rant, but I think I did pretty well. But so after I was reading this, I just became so interested and furious with that story, and not just of who she was, but how she was kind of the symbol for all the oppressive narratives of women. And I hadn't really read a lot of HD, and I have kind of a theory as to why I like HD a lot. And I think it's, in my head, it's connected to why I like Stevie Nicks, but we can talk about that later. But she uses these kind of repeated charged words kind of over and over again that at first seem a little bit abstract or bigger than, they're a little bit more mysterious, but in the repetition, you start to kind of be a part of those repeated words and those repeated images. And I just loved reading it and thinking about that as this incredibly vulnerable story of not just Helen, but of what is a story. And I think even in Helen in Egypt itself, she asks, like, is it all a story? And if the I is asking that, I think that everything just kind of doubles back on itself. So yeah, I kind of knew it was going to be a book, because when I started writing to something, it was kind of like a amalgamation of like Antigone, Helen, the Eidolon, sort of thing. And then I kind of realized it really all was kind of this Helen figure. And I because of how I started to feel about language and serial work and what it does to kind of show contradictions a lot, I knew it was going to be a sprawling long poem. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. Like these can't be separate poems. These have to kind of complicate each other and kind of resist their own form as they go. And that's why I really love serial poems, is because they allow for all these contradictions to live at the same time. And so, yeah, I hoped for a long poem and a book pretty much early on. Didn't know if it was going to happen, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love to hear all of those influences because I was thinking a lot of Adrienne Rich's essay when we did Awaken and revision and taking those stories back and kind of doing giving the voice back to the female characters. And I think that with Helen especially, you know, we always hear the quote, launched 1,000 ships, you know, the war and the violence, but very rarely do we get this kind of interaction between a speaker and not even a physical being, but just the idea or the representation or the figure of Helen, which I think is what's part of what's so compelling in the poems, is that, you know, the speaker's kind of in this one-sided conversation, but it still feels like there's so much give and take and so much that you can build upon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like Helen is so much, because the one thing we really know about her is what's been done to her, or what she ends up, or what like her, what's the word I'm looking for? The consequences that come after her, right? And so it's almost like she becomes like this action instead of an actual person. And then I think it's the same thing with the like speech acts of trying to talk to her, which is like hopefully not continually erasing her, but that's
right.
It's language.
So speaking of language, I know I sent you some questions ahead of time, but I might just jump around a little bit. Yeah. Not to like put you on the spot or like play gotcha, but I've just been thinking a lot in my second reading of the text, a lot about naming and the power of naming and how that's wrapped up in these kind of masculine ideals, Adam naming all the animals and things like that. And I wondered what, as you were writing the text, where you kind of saw the power for the female speaker in naming different things, the body, trauma, violence, Helen, even putting a name to that sense of an echo that Helen becomes in the text. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a little bit, it's difficult because I think naming is so important, right? A lot of time, I mean, any therapist would be able to tell us that, you know, being able to name and notice that, you know, that something's going on is part of recovery, or is part of getting better. Just recognizing and giving it an articulation that makes it real, right? I think that's a lot of what naming is it makes it a concrete, real thing that you can kind of bring into your own, I don't know, thoughts as you go throughout your day. But I think at the same time, and this is kind of the push and pull of what's of the book, is what happens when you name something. Why do we call her Helen of Troy? She wasn't actually from Troy. She was from Sparta. I don't really know how much that matters, but it really, you know, it's just what we call her Troy, because we call her Helen of Troy because the war, right? And so I think naming can also be, and so it's about kind of balancing how much harm versus how much care you can do with language. And I think, and I mean, what was so funny is when I defended the dissertation, the introduction, I think actually it's part of the acknowledgements at the end as well, but I started the book, I don't know why, the very month that my grandmother died, and I was very close to my grandmother, and her name throughout her life was Scrip, because she was like worked in a coal mining town, and at like 8 years old was the little girl handing out script to all of the you know, fellow coal miners in the town. And so everybody just started calling her Scrip. And so what's it like to be known for something as problematic as Scrip, but also you know, for being known as a name with money. And so and to me, that idea of paying homage to this person named a thing, and my dissertation advisor kind of picked that out and was like, that's interesting, let's think about it more. And I didn't know what to say about it. I just, for the last 4 years, have been thinking about it more. Because I think there's something there, but it's that active naming is it's a push and pull, and I think it can be really helpful, right? But it can also silence at the same time.
Yeah, because with naming comes the idea of defining or fixing something and making something stuck. I love the phrases that you kind of call upon, the descriptions of Helen that we're used to, like yellow-haired or white-armed, and those are the only snippets that we really get of who this person is who had this life. So it's those little kind of epithets that go to describe but also fix an image, even as we're talking about an image of an image or an echo of an image throughout the text. So you mentioned a little bit about HD's text having kind of repetitions of words throughout that kind of took on different meanings or took on more meaning throughout the narrative or the story. And I was wondering if you could talk about the repetitions in this book, because I noticed so many, not just of images, but of different phrases. And then there's the recurring question, like, what is the thing, that comes up a few times too. And I mean, that's like the biggest question. And it goes back to that idea of putting a name to something too. So it's all kind of tied up in this defining. But I wondered how much of those repetitions you pulled from inspiration in the source material, or did that kind of come as you were writing as well, just through the process?
I think a lot of times to me, it helped kind of show time a little bit, because the book was written, not only was the book written in kind of a span of like 3 or 4 years, but it was also like, the point is to show that it was written kind of over a period of time. And so, yeah, it was, I kind of wanted to bring back these questions or these images to kind of show how it doesn't matter whether you're at a doctor's office in the fall of one year or eating 3 rings of dried pineapple the next June, but like, you're still kind of continually faced with that question, and that Helen isn't, again, Helen, but this bigger question of whose story is being told and who are we missing out, and who actually are we fighting for and or against.
Right. Yeah. I love that. And I loved reading and seeing something like the tea olive, the tree that comes up once, and then I get to it again and I was like, I've seen that before. And then it just kind of, it gets you involved in the text in a different way, almost like when you're listening to an album and you hear like a repeated phrase from one song to the next and you're not expecting it, and it's a nice surprise.
And it's, I mean, that's I think so much of what I love about HD Stevie Nicks, where it's, you know, when you have this word, like, you know, for HD, it was like spiral, or it was angel, or it was something that, and it's like, what a stupid word. It's not who cares about that word? It's like an abstract, you know, I would tell my creative writing students, like, it's too abstract. We need concrete, specific detail. But when we have that word in the beginning and then kind of bump up against something that's, you know, else, you know, midway through, and then it's this kind of call back, and it's almost like the meaning of the word doesn't matter anymore, almost kind of the way, like, when, I don't know, when I think like, when Jewish people pray in Hebrew when they don't know Hebrew, or when Catholics pray in Latin when they don't know Latin, or even just like the word amen, like, that's not a word, but it is a word, because there's so much meaning kind of involved. So it like invokes this mystery. And of course we know what the word angel means, but it kind of adds in that mystery and like bumps up against new things every time. And I think it's hard because I mean, I did pull out a couple of repetitions in the book, because, you know, my editor, shout out to my editor, K.M.A. Sullivan, who, you know, kind of asked, like, now what is this one? What's the meaning of this one? Is this a pet word? Is this a pet image that shows up? I brought in tea olive like 2 or 3 more times, but those didn't, you know, they weren't as important. So it's, you want to kind of show repetition, but then it's not, so that it's not a crutch. It's not just like, I'm going to keep leaning on this one.
Right. And I love too the certain moments where you realize that it's going to be used in a different way. So you get the repetition, but it also has variation. And then you're encountering it at a different point in the text. So it also has a different time, or a time sense in a way too. So there's all these different layers that go into it. I wrote this entire paper on repetition for my last semester. So I've been thinking about repetition a lot, but that was one of the things that I was tracking in my first read. And, like, okay, I've seen this one and then I've seen this one, and then trying to link them throughout those threads. You keep bringing up this Stevie Nicks HD connection. I need to hear about it.
Well, so I was like, Gail, don't say it. But every time the Gail voice goes, don't say something, it just comes out. I'm going to say, I'm not going to talk about this. And then I just say it. But I think it's very similar. I think like the writing, like I think Stevie Nicks, she calls herself a poet. But it's so much of her writing is using these images over and over again, like the idea of the house, you'll come into my house, and then that kind of gets played several times throughout different songs. And then it's this idea of, not to bring up stereotypes about Stevie Nicks, but like it's a little witchy. It's a little bit kind of, you're invoking mystery by bringing in these single words that kind of get repeated over and over again. And for like 3 years, I've been like, I should really write something about how I think they're so connected. Because it's like a beautiful hermeticism that ends up happening because you listen to an album and then you realize that one of these lines is kind of similar to this other album song, and then they kind of both connect to each other, and it's just like this simple word, but they get used a lot, and so they end up being charged like an amulet, almost with like a magic.
Yeah, like an incantation or something. Yeah.
So it like invokes it instead of tries to describe something.
Yeah.
It like brings it forth. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Love it. Okay. I just had to ask, before we got off on another tangent, I had to ask about the Stevie Nicks connection there. So in thinking of all of the sources and all of the inspirations that you're drawing from, did those impact like the visual form of the poems, or even like a metrical form? I noticed a little bit of the more lineated poems. They almost looked to me like a few of the stanzas would be like epic stanzas or something like a sapphic stanza. And I don't typically do like a scansion with the meter because that's just not my thing. But I was just wondering, what other influences did you pull besides like the story and those type of things, if that was even a consideration?
So in terms of meter, I'm like, I've just in the last 2 years really had to do a good look into meter because I've had to teach it for the first time. And I didn't think it really was important until recently. I'm going to turn, I'm very spotlit right now.
It's great lighting.
There we go. Is it great lighting? I feel like it's not. I feel like it's the opposite of lighting. Let me check. But yeah, sorry. Let me just make sure I'm okay. All right, yeah. So in terms of meter, meter is a little bit more intuitive to me, and so I've had to kind of take my intuition and start to like parse out why I think it works well. So as a lot of that's just kind of how it ended up going in terms with the lines, and so I'd read a lot of it out loud, and I wouldn't necessarily. I'm gonna move, I think.
Do it. That's you have that freedom with the Zoom, Zoom events.
Wow. I'm just gonna go over here. Okay, great. Hi guys. Hi everybody. So I wasn't great at rhythm, but I read a lot of things out loud, and I wanted to just say lyric because I think it kind of invoked Homer and and it's also the kind of the way I think in my head. It was just repeated phrases. But then also I think with the citations and the quotes and things like that, so much, and it's a little bit of why I love Helen in Egypt, is that so much of it is about uncertainty and is about kind of disrupting the story anyway, that I didn't want, like I really wanted to just, okay, well, what did Bart say? Let's just bring him in, or, let's bring in some of these lines from the poem, because I wanted to kind of have more people in so that it sort of broke up that just obsessive constant lyric I. That like I just can't, as a poet, I can't stand reading my own writing. So
I think that we all feel the same way.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of it, I mean, and that's a lot of HD's, a lot of Helen in Egypt was in almost opposition to Pound's cantos, because she was like, why are you just constantly voicing this egomaniacal machismo, this like misogynistic, egotistic I constantly, when you're missing this vulnerability, you're missing this deep questioning and this deep understanding of what could be beyond that. And so, I mean, Helen in Egypt basically because she wasn't trying to revise Helen's story. She was basically saying, what is a story? And that gave me so much more freedom to kind of bring in my own stuff and play with, and because again, I didn't want to have my misogynistic, egotistic I out there. I wanted to bring in other people's words. So yeah, I liked the idea of footnotes and citations and other influences kind of jutting their way in. But hopefully not too much of jutting.
Yeah, no, I think
that answers all your questions.
No, it does. I think all of this is so interesting when you're working with something that has such a cultural history on its own. It's always interesting to see how to reinvent that or break it up or just kind of make something new and make something your own with your own lyric I that's not Pound's lyric I or anyone else's. So I also really wanted to ask about the function of memory as an aspect of repetition in the text and an aspect of almost like its own sort of eidolon in the text or image or icon, in how you feel that the memories function together with the sort of echoes of Helen's story and things like that in regards with the speaker or relation to the speaker.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm really interested in and why I love the sprawling serial poem also. I don't even know, like I call it different things all the time because it's not a long poem. It's not an epic poem. It's not a poem in parts. It's this it's continuing to resist its form the whole time. And I felt that was, and I really wanted to do a lot of work on what those poems show about the way that we remember things, right? Because things get kind of twisted and changed as we continue to come back and remember things. And yeah, and I mean, my studies in my PhD program were essentially in memory and cultural memory studies. So I was really, really thinking about that. And I felt like I'm still semi doing work on it, but trying to get at what the serial poem or at what the book length poem does to show those nuggets of memory continuing to happen. And I think that probably has a lot to do with the amulets of words that kind of come back as well. But yeah, and I think as far as memory, it's just so difficult because we say that when we come back to something, it's brand new, right? When we retell our memories, it's a story. That gets really tricky when it comes to historical memory, because while I can say, like, and that's why I think, so HD kind of had this theory, which was actually, HD didn't have this theory. A wonderful scholar who I can't remember the name of right now came up with this theory for what HD is doing, but it's basically gesturing as close as possible to the thing without defining the thing. And that's what that kind of repetition does. And it's, I think, I think Nathaniel Mackey even calls it like the swans or the geese that circle around the lake. And it's trying to get at something. It's trying to point to memory. It's trying to show that there's something missing, but never quite exactly say what it is, because then that's going to silence it, or it's going to define it in some harmful way. And so, I mean, I think about this a lot. I'll back up, but I think that's important, right? Like the gesture to real is important, but you can't ever actually work to define it, because then you're missing that lack that you need to always acknowledge, right? I think it reminds me a lot of when a big argument in Holocaust studies, which is probably, I think in the early 90s, this one historiographer was like, all history is just a story. And, which was kind of leading up from some stuff, like a lot of people were talking about what it was like, that history is a narrative and then it's all our memories. And then this historiographer was like, you know what? I think every piece of history is just a story. It's basically just a product of the powers that be, and like, who are we to say that it's a lie, or that that this story about the Holocaust is the same as someone who like, we can't say what's fact and what's fiction because no one can really access the horror of the Holocaust. And then this other theorist came back and said, hey, okay, here's the thing though, there are a lot of Holocaust deniers out there, and this leaves this space way open. So you still have to have objectivity. You still have to try to reach for objectivity, or try to reach for the real, even if you're never going to get it. I know that's a big, long, weird connection to think about memory, but I think it really connects to I think what language does, and what I'm trying to think of with Helen, where it's like, I'm not just going to wring my hands and say, well, too bad, Helen doesn't exist. Guess she's forgotten. I hate her. But you have to kind of keep trying to talk to her and keep working at it, or else she gets actually erased.
Right. Yeah, there's a way that continued questioning gets closer to what the real would be, but again, doesn't ever touch it. And I think, we see that a lot with the first poem that you read. All of those questions hint at something that was there, or something that is definable or even touchable, but they're not ever going to reach that place because they're still in that moment of questioning.
Yeah, and I love being that idea of lost loss, right? Like you need to be able, like, language is a sieve. Absolutely, it's never going to reach what we're getting to, but you need to be able to try, and then be able to kind of say, look, I know language isn't enough, and just kind of continue to point back to it.
Yeah. So I'm going to pop into the chat. I saw a few questions here, since we're about 15 minutes out from 6, and we definitely have so much more to talk about, but if you guys have questions, put them in the chat. So Mike is asking, since Helen has been idealized for centuries as the essence of beauty, obscuring the living person as well as the diversity of what is beautiful, are you aiming at exploring and bringing out this wonderful human range of what is beautiful?
I'm going to say 1, yes. That's it. Number 2, no. But I think the question of why we call something beautiful in the first place, and it's, I remember talking with this concept with my students, and the question I ended up coming up with was, why don't we call a sunset handsome? Which is like, why don't we give it this masculine concept, like, because supposedly the like masculine opposite of the feminine beauty is handsomeness or whatever, right? So like, why are we constantly wanting, what even is that impulse to give the kind of cultural feminine ideal traits to works of art or things that we find beautiful? And what is the purpose of beautiful, and why do we even want something to be beautiful in the first place? That's about all I have to say, just because I think I want to kind of destruct not just what is beautiful, because obviously I think there's a lot to be done with the different kinds of worlds and people and viewpoints that we should see as beautiful. But I also think it's really important to question, what is that idea of making something artistically, aesthetically pleasing? What's so great about that?
And we have a question on the revisionism, opening for new voices in the role of naming. Okay, so this one's getting a little bit more at like the cultural politics of kind of the work of revising the story or revisiting the story. Let's see. Yeah, let's see. Do you have any thoughts on that? Kind of a packed question.
It is. There's a lot. I want to just sit with it for a little bit. But I will say a lot of the conversations I have with my fiction partner at Young Harris, a lot of students are thinking that in order to show people's voices or diversify, she calls it like Disneyifying, which is like, let's take an already known story we have and just like pop in someone different. Aren't we so great? Isn't that just so progressive? And I think that to me is that's what we want to not do. I'll just say that. It's just, when, again, like instead of just popping in, what if this person were like this person, or what if it were like this, or let's make an easy swap or switch. I think that's asking for trouble. That's just, and first of all, it's asking for no one to do any real work, right? Which is, I think I just keep saying to myself over and over again these past like few weeks or month, it's just gotta do the work. You gotta do the work. Like It's just, you can't just be, try to kind of cover over something and say, yes, we've done our work. We've made something more diverse in our storytelling. You actually have to revise the storytelling itself. I don't know if that totally fits with that, but
yeah, no, that was great. Will you be doing any more online readings, virtual book tour, things of that nature?
I would like to. I want to have, I think, a online book party, launch party, still in the works. It's hard. So it's already hard enough to make up your own tour and schedule for yourself. As you can tell, I don't really even like saying the word I in poems, and I just want to pretend someone else is writing these poems. So I'm not great at like setting up a book tour for myself, but the answer is yes, there will be.
Great. We'll be on the lookout for all of that.
I'm going to work on it.
This is a good question. Wondering if you've discovered other Helens, particularly in non-Western cultures.
I mean, I have. I've been reading so much, but I couldn't tell you a one right now. I mean, really, it's just that, so much of this is the idea of loss, right? Like when we have, in the book's Dong, it's basically just what do we do with language when we just don't have any information for these huge swaths of people who've been killed, or these huge swaths of people who've been silenced, or just these people who've been silenced and forgotten. How do we even try to access what could be, right? And that to me it's horribly depressing, but for some reason it's incredibly fascinating to me. But yeah, I think if we think of any kind of metaphorical character, especially women, or someone who kind of defies some sort of category in some way, I think that person is like, there's definitely that chance of literally becoming a metaphor, right? Like in any sort of myth or storytelling, or even in the way that we talk about news, and like when we have mainstream media talk to us these days, everything kind of gets slammed down into a metaphor of something else instead of anything real, really.
Yeah. I think was it in your acknowledgements page where you talked about distrusting poetry, or was that in one of the poems?
Probably one of the poems.
Talks about, and I think that that's such a great moment where, you start to question even the tools that we have as writers and poets. What are we doing when we put a metaphor to something? What are we doing when we do something figurative to describe something that's so visceral or so violent? And I loved those moments in the book that were kind of self-reflexive of the speaker in the act of creating the book, or the act of seeing themselves in the book, writing. There were so many moments that were kind of looking back on the speaker, which I loved. And I think also worked to break up some of the direct Helen address poems too.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I started out with just these Helen poems, and then I realized that if I wanted that, if I kept going with it, it would just it would be kind of inauthentic, and it would be kind of, Helen, I know you were like this, blah, 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 blah. But like, I don't know anything, right? I know certain things. And so, and the only way I could kind of bring up the citations of what we know about her, of the fact that they call her white armed. There's 1,000 articles out there that are like, Helen's super not white, but it doesn't matter because that she is in our image of her. And that's what's so frustrating. And they're like, is she blonde? What does this hairstyle mean? It's like, it doesn't matter. It does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but in terms of her image, it doesn't matter. But yeah, and so I wanted to kind of bring up those questions, and it's really difficult to do so and still be authentic when you're talking to Helen, right? And I felt like I needed to kind of interrupt and show the writing process and what it's like to to try and listen and take the ego out of writing, and that even the act of having a metaphor or a simile or anything can actually be destructive. But then also write. And I think that's, I'm having a difficult time writing because of that exact thing. It's like, well, if I were to write, it would be about how harmful my writing is. So then I'm not going to write, or, it's a push and pull. But yeah, I think I think it was necessary to I called them loops too. Like when I was writing the prose parts that weren't speaking to Helen, I called them loops because I wanted to kind of show that they kept coming back, that they were breaking it up a little bit.
Right. Yeah. We got another question from Amanda. What correlations do you see with biblical women and their stories to Helen?
So all of them. Mary, obviously, right? This idea of virginity, this idea of the only thing she's ever done was an act of pain. And like, did she even, was she a mother? Was she anything else? We kind of sort of follow along, but it's also hard because there were like 3 other Marys in the Bible, and, and then there's a lot going on. And then I just learned, I don't know if anybody's a biblical scholar here, but I just learned from a student a couple months ago that there was a woman whom Jesus raised from the dead, and her name was Tabitha. And I want to do a little bit of research on her because I'm like, oh, so we all care about Lazarus, but like, who's Tabitha? How did he raise her from the dead? And yeah, I think, and it's not really revision. It's this kind of pointing back to because again, questions of the Bible. It is it's kind of a culling of history, but it's also literature, and it's also these stories. And it's very tricky. And I think it happens with everything. And I think the problem is that a lot of the source material that is so loud is this Western white kind of source material. And yet those are the things you want to tear down, but then you also want to be able to also lift up the other kinds of source material as well, because they're there. And again, they just take work. It just takes doing that work. And it's called work because it's hard, because it takes thinking. Yeah, it's difficult.
So I wanted to ask one question more about the publishing side. If you could talk a little bit just about your journey to getting this manuscript published, what brought you to Yes Yes Books, the submission process. I know so many poetry books we see are the result of contests, but I just wanted to know, how you navigated that whole labyrinth of chaos.
Well, it's kind of hard because, it felt like a while. I don't think it ended up being quite that long, but it felt like a while between when my first book was published and my second. And I just, I thought to myself, I submitted to contests, or I wanted it to go to Yes Yes. And to me, that was like winning a contest in itself. Because I just love what they do. And I love it. Because, again, the act of doing the work, right? It's not just optical, hey, look at our easy, diverse voices, and we won't do anything else. It's these incredible new stories and new points of view, and just packed full of these incredible people who I just love and whose work I just love. And then also at the same time, doing work behind the scenes and donating books and money to organizations. And I really enjoyed how it has, not just even in the last couple weeks what the work they've done, but just that they've been doing that work all along. Right. And that's what the thing I really, really love about them. And so I was just so happy to be picked up by them, because also I kind of had some difficulties with earlier presses so in 2014, I had a manuscript picked up by an editor who supported me and just said that my story mattered and it was great. And then who was then kind of revealed to be this sexual predator and a bully. And the press went down, or I pulled my book and the press went down. And that manuscript I haven't published it yet, because so much of that, I mean, it also hasn't been picked up. But before, a lot of that is like, I didn't want to publish it for a few years because there was so much shame attached to that. And the same thing happened with a chapbook a chapbook press, a press that was holding my chapbook, same exact thing happened. And these people were supporters and friends, and who I thought were just my early writing friends, and they ended up just being such huge disappointments.
Wow.
And so it really showed me that it's just a lie to think that your personal and political life isn't at all connected to your writing life or your business life or whatever you want to call it. It's that all of that matters. And I wanted someone who I could personally rely on, and that, because it all just comes together. And so, yeah, I'm just really, and the way they, this summer I can't even imagine a press trying to sell books and be a press right now. So,
right.
Anyway, I'm happy. Yeah. And it was a lot of submissions. And this other manuscript that I've been sending out since 2016. Yeah. And before that, I'd been sending it out to get published that first time. And so it's been a while, and it can be really daunting and a terrible process when you know that people like your book or that your book is pretty good, but it's just not there yet. So to everybody who is sending out books, I just can't commiserate enough. Your books are good.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
When I went to pre-order your book, I ended up finding about 4 other books to buy from Yes Yes at the same time. Just authors that I've been following, or people that we published in Poet Lore and whose work I loved. And I was like, oh, I didn't know they published here. I didn't know they published here. So now I have all these books on their way to me, which is great. I don't have room for them, but we always make space.
Oh, so, yeah. I've got a mantle that's not a bookshelf at all, but it is now.
We turn everything into bookshelves, don't we? It's amazing what can become a bookshelf if you try hard. Yeah. So it is just about 6 o'clock, and I don't want to go over time, but if anyone has any last questions, this has been so great. I've loved getting to dive into the book with you. I think it just always illuminates so much. And for anyone who's thinking of writing reviews, I think the best reviews are informed by conversations with the authors, because the insight is just incredible. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, Gail. And
thank you for talking to me. I just loved this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And reading the book.
Yeah, I can't wait to get the print copy in. Everyone, please pre-order it. Find that link up in the chat. And I think maybe if Zach could post it one more time before everyone leaves. And then I'll also drop a plug for the Writers Center. We are taking donations for our scholarship program to ensure that people can afford to take our workshops in this time where creativity is so important, and we want to make sure that people can access the workshops from home. So we should have a Venmo or donation link happening. There we go. Venmo, PayPal, and through our website if you are finding some loose change around or something like that. But we know money is super tight right now with everything that's going on. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's been a great chat. Great to virtually meet you, Gail. Hopefully sometime in the future we'll get to meet in person.
Yeah.
but this has been lovely, a lovely and inspiring chat. So I hope that everyone leaves here inspired and ready to read your book.
Thanks everybody for coming.